Today I'm going to be talking about why I think I got cancer. And I think that a lot of us have this question. We all wonder, why this person and not that person? How come somebody smokes and doesn't get lung cancer, but other people who don't smoke and take care of themselves get cancer? I know that this is a big topic and it's a multifactorial thing. And we are pretty complex as humans, but there are clues and there are patterns, you can say, in terms of people getting sick and how the prognosis plays out when they do get sick. Identifying some of these things, I think, will be helpful for us when we are trying to heal from our diseases. If you don't know my history, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, a very rare type of sarcoma, 8 years ago. And I embarked on this whole path to healing. And along that path, I discovered that there were so many factors, so many things that could have contributed to me developing the cancer in the first place, me staying sick, and the different things that I can work on in order to heal. I really feel like I've gotten to the point where I see all of the different factors and the patterns, especially meeting other people with cancer and reading other people's stories, and just seeing that these patterns kind of come to play and it gets repeated over and over again. In Western medicine, being a doctor myself, disease is seen through this biomedical approach where disease is seen as like this separate entity, as some pathological process that involves like the order of cells and molecules, organs, different body systems. It's viewed as this deviation from normal biological function, like a genetic predisposition, for example. And so while that's one aspect of the disease, it's clearly not all that there is because human beings are so much more complex. So in 1977, Dr. George Engel came up with this biopsychosocial approach where he talks about the interconnections between the mind, the body, and then the social and environmental factors. You have biological aspects, which are genetics and epigenetics, neurochemistry and function. And then you have your psychological aspects, which includes the coping skills that you can have, the cognitive abilities, your beliefs, your perceptions. And then there's the social aspect side, which includes your relationships, your family life, support, your socioeconomic status. So we cannot separate the mind from the body, just as we can't separate from our environment, because we are social beings and we're called to interact with other people. We're placed in a certain environment and we respond to that environment. And so disease is not separated from the individual, but it's a process that manifests how we are living our lives. This is all connected via the psycho-neuro-endocrine-immunology network, which is the link between this bidirectional communication that you have between your nervous system, your endocrine system, and the immune system. And there's crosstalk between them that all come together to affect your physical health. For example, when you are stressed and experience a negative emotion, this is going to trigger the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline from the adrenal gland, which is part of the endocrine system. And this is going to affect your immune system either by suppressing it and making you more susceptible to fighting off disease like viruses and bacteria, or it can lead to cancer or autoimmune conditions. So steroids are a copy of cortisol, and it's kind of interesting that we use steroids to treat a lot of these conditions that can be triggered by stress, like psoriasis, eczema, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, cancer. So you're using stress hormones in order to treat something that is caused by stress. And that's kind of pretty funny if you think about it. And we're not addressing the root cause at all. We're just basically trying to put out the fire. But this doesn't work because you're actually exacerbating the situation. And then the other thing is that you have external factors that can lead to oxidative stress. What oxidative stress is when you have an imbalance between the free radicals and the antioxidants in your body. So this often results from mitochondrial dysfunction. Things that cause oxidative stress can be infections like viruses, bacteria, fungal infections, parasitic infections. And then you have your environmental toxins like pollution, alcohol, tobacco smoke. You have lifestyle things like a poor diet or lack of exercise, obesity. To give you an example, if you ate a poor diet that is high in sugar, this is what happens to your mitochondria. When you have that glucose spike that follows after a high carbohydrate meal, the glucose is supposed to be used up in the mitochondria and get converted to ATP, which is energy. However, because you're overwhelming your system with too much glucose in the system, the energy doesn't get produced fast enough and the mitochondria ends up shutting down. And this impairment in the electron transport chain leads to the production of reactive oxygen species, which are known as free radicals. And so these free radicals will go around and damage our DNA, and then can cause mutations that activate harmful genes and can lead to the development of cancer. And they also poke holes in our cell membranes and turn normal cells into malfunctioning cells. So the repeated insults in regards to eating a poor diet are harmful because it's going to lead to this mitochondrial dysfunction and hence the oxidative stress, and then can lead to disease. So aside from these external factors, I'm going to go into something that I found very interesting, and that's the emotional component of cancer development. And the question is, are there personalities, these cancer personality traits that people who develop cancer have in common? I'm going to talk about two different studies that I found after reading a book by Dr. Gabor Mate called When the Body Says No. So he talks about a study in 1984 that was published in the Journal of Psychosomatic Research that compared three groups of patients. One was a group of patients with melanoma, one was a group with cardiovascular disease, and then there's a control group that didn't have any disease at all. And then they were hooked up to these dermographs that measured electrical skin reactions that reflects the physiological stress. And then they were shown these slides that were designed to elicit psychological distress. And the slide said things like, "You're ugly," or "You only have yourself to blame." And then they asked the participants to subjectively record how calm or disturbed they were by these slides. And the results showed that the physiological stress response was the same in all three groups. However, the patients with melanoma denied awareness of being anxious or being upset about the situation. And the cardiovascular patients actually had the opposite response, where they were more hyperreactive. So the studies showed that some people can experience emotional stress physically in their bodies, but they store it in the recesses of their minds beyond conscious awareness. And this is what happened with the melanoma patients. In another study in 1991 in Melbourne, Australia, there were 22 questions that were asked in a personal interview of about 600 patients that had new cases of colorectal cancer. And then there were about 700 matched controls. The questions were formulated to test a particular personality profile as a cancer risk. And it showed that the patients with cancer had more elements of denial and repression of anger and of other negative emotions. They also had commitment to social norms that resulted in this external appearance of being a nice or a good person. They had suppression of reactions that may offend others, and there was a lot of avoidance of conflict. And this was independent of other risk factors like diet, alcohol intake, family history of colorectal cancer, marital status, religion, and country of birth. In the book, he kind of goes over the different personality types. You have the type A personality, where it's tended to be angry, tense, fast, aggressive, in control, and these people are more prone to heart disease. Type B is like a balanced, moderate human being who can feel and express emotions without losing themselves in uncontrolled emotional outbreaks. And then you have the type C personality, which is the cancer-prone personality, where these people are extremely cooperative, patient, passive, lacking assertiveness, and accepting. And a coping style that is more characterized by this tendency to defer one's own needs to the needs of others. And this pattern seems to contribute to cancer risk through the immune and hormonal pathways, as we talked about. When I read all this, it was very eye-opening for me because I reflected on my own personality and how I coped with stress. Growing up, I don't think that I ever really let myself feel emotions. And I realized that I might have a personality that is very cancer prone. And so what I think caused my cancer is the perfect storm. I grew up in Vietnam and I was exposed to a lot of potential toxins and especially parasitic infections. I remember one time when I was about 6 years old, my dad and I got very sick from eating seafood. I don't know what it was, but I remember being extremely sick and thinking that he and I were going to die. And we had a doctor that came to our house and they gave us a shot, and I somehow miraculously recovered, but I just still remember that incident to this day because that was very traumatic. And I do think that whatever infection I got at that point somehow played a role in my cancer. My dad was also in the Vietnam War, and he was exposed to Agent Orange, and he had a lot of stress himself that he could have passed on to me genetically. And there's a lot of cancer in my family, that especially unknown cancers and people just dying young, and it's really hard to find the history. But I have a lot of uncles and cousins and grandparents, everyone that died pretty young or died from cancer of some sort. My dad himself developed liver cancer after getting hepatitis C through the war, and he died after 6 months. And that was the other factor that I really think contributed to my cancer, because at the time that he got sick, I was in medical school. No, I was in residency, and it was my first year of residency, so it was especially stressful. I was working about 80 hours a week, 6 days a week. I rarely slept at all. I didn't get very much sleep. I wanted to still do everything, so I went out and partied with my friends on the weekends, and I drank a lot of alcohol, even though I was allergic to it. A lot of Asian people don't have the enzyme that breaks down alcohol, so it results in this allergic reaction where your face gets red and flushed. And that happened to me, but I didn't care, and I just kept drinking anyway. And I was drinking almost on a daily basis at some point. And I definitely was not taking care of myself in terms of sleeping and diet. I did exercise and I tried to do those things, but I was living a very, very stressful lifestyle. And then on top of that, my father got sick. And so I was driving home every weekend that I could to see him. And I would just leave work right after on Friday night and drive home 5 hours, stay at home with him until Sunday, and then go back and work for the rest of the week. And so my life was kind of like that for months and months on end. And it was very stressful. And ultimately, he passed away. And my dad was everything to me. He was my hero. He was my role model. I loved my dad so much, and I really wanted to be like him. He was everything that I thought a good person would be. And so when I lost him, the grief was overwhelming. I had never lost a loved one, and that was the first time that I had ever experienced that sort of trauma. And I think that I just didn't know how to process it or how to deal with the grief at all. And on top of that, I felt guilty for not taking the time off of work and residency to go home and spend the rest of my time with him. He kind of died unexpectedly, even though I knew that it was terminal, but it was too soon. It was faster than I thought, and I thought I had more time. And on the day that he passed away, I couldn't even make it to the hospital in time. He died while I was driving to the hospital from Long Island to New York. So I was about 2 hours into my drive when he passed away. And so that was just a constant guilt and holding on to the fact that I couldn't be there for my dad. And that coupled with the grief and with me having to go through residency and during this such stressful time in my life was what I thought led to the development of the cancer. I had felt a lump around the time that he got sick, but it rapidly grew, I think, after that. And then it continued to grow as I was trying to plan my wedding and, of course, another very big stress factor, while, again, still not taking care of myself mentally or physically. And I repressed a lot of my emotions. And during my healing journey, that's when I realized that I didn't really know how to feel. I didn't even know what emotions felt like in my body because I was so good at stuffing them down and repressing them that I didn't even know that things bothered me. It just felt like everything was fine and I coped very well. I became really, really good at coping, and that resulted in me just really being this nice person where you could just walk all over me and I would just do anything in order to gain acceptance and love. I think this goes all the way back to childhood in terms of how we develop our coping strategy. As humans, we are wired for authenticity and attachment. Attachment is something that happens when we are a child. It's when we have this bond with our caregiver, and it could be either secure or insecure attachment. In attachment, the purpose of that is for protection and for nurturing. Let's say your caregiver didn't have the capacity to be there for you emotionally, where you felt like you couldn't really fully express yourself without having to feel bad about it. So that's kind of where you learn to adapt and cope by pretending that everything's okay, that there is no problem, and you almost become like an adult in a way where you end up soothing your caregiver and you care about what they feel and their anxieties rather than your own, and then you end up sacrificing your own authenticity and your own self in the process. And it's just something that is learned, and it's a good thing for survival because we think that we need that in order to survive, and we do when we're a child, but then this gets carried into adulthood where we're still doing the same thing in our relationships. And so that is like this niceness personality. And in fact, niceness can kill because self-betrayal is such an exhausting process, and it brings so much shame and suffering because deep down inside you know how you want to be, yet you can't express that, yet you can't let others see that, because if they do see that, what if they don't like you? What if they're going to abandon you? So your body goes into this fight or flight state, and it's a truly stressful state, and you kind of just keep going on like this. For me, I did this until the cancer came out, I think. And as a result of that, my body was really trying to speak to me like, hey, pay attention. You're not being authentic. You're not feeling your emotions. You're repressing all of this anger and all of these emotions, and you need to deal with it. And it took me such a long time to realize that. And I'm still working on it now. It's hard, for me, the emotional side of getting cancer is probably the worst part. Everything else I can do. I can change my diet, I can take supplements, I can exercise, but treating the emotional aspect of it and trying to change the way that I process emotions and trying to change my interactions with other people and how I deal with relationships, that is truly the hardest thing in my whole healing journey. The difficult thing about being sick and trying to heal from that, because we are wired to be in a safe, familiar place. And even if that means that the familiar place is very toxic, we might still end up being there because we don't want to step into the unknown and we don't want to experience difficulties in that way. At some point, you're going to have to choose your pain. Would you rather be in pain of self-suppression or the pain of losing the attachment? If you feel like you weren't loved, you are going to be really nice and charming in order to get that love. But how long can you really keep that up for? How long can you keep being who you're not? Whether you know it or not, your body feels it physiologically. And that PNI network that I talked about, that leads to the physiological presentation of what you're doing in terms of your emotions. And so it's very important to figure that out, to think about that, to see if, are you acting authentically? Are you putting others' needs in front of your own? I mean, there's nothing wrong with caring about other people, but when it's at the expense of your own self, then it can be a really big problem for disease. And I truly believe that addressing that is one of the biggest things that you need to address in order to heal from cancer. From all the cases of the spontaneous remissions that I've looked at, these people usually make some sort of a drastic change in terms of their emotional health, and they will let go of toxic relationships in their lives. They will forgive, they will let go of anger and resentment and work through their emotions and do that work. You know, it's the toughest work to do, but I think that it's the most worth it because it's either life or death, and you only have one life to live, and especially having cancer, that life may be even shorter. So you have to courageously dive into this and just unravel it and work on it a little bit at a time. And I know that it can be so painful, but it's very worth it in the end, especially for your healing. At the end of the day, social support isn't just merely being in the presence of somebody else. It's actually being heard and being seen. And as a human being, I think that's all, what we really yearn for, is for this need to be seen and to be heard and to be our true selves. And when we don't have that, and when we have to suppress our emotions, and when we have to act like something we're not, that creates a lot of internal chaos and stress. Illness is a potential teacher, and it's up to you to decide what lessons you're going to learn from this. It's the opportunity for you to look within, to see what is going on in the terrain, in the soil, that is creating this perfect environment for the cancer to grow. I think that it's just a message to yourself that, hey, there's something wrong here, and you need to figure out what's going on, and you need to change. And that's what cancer has been for me. And I am continuing on this search to really take a look at what's in my soil, in my terrain, and then to do everything that I can in order to change it so that the cancer doesn't have the environment to grow in. The susceptibility to getting disease and to getting sick is one side, but the other side is that it has to have the right environment to grow in. And so if you don't let the environment be what the cancer needs, and then it's going to go away. And this is my hope. My journey is not over yet, and I'm still working on a lot of things, but I do feel that at this point I've really developed a lot of awareness about how to express my emotions and being authentic, because that really is the main thing. You reach a certain point where you realize that it's just not worth it anymore. It's not worth it to sacrifice yourself and your well-being in order to make other people happy. And you're just going to have to start prioritizing yourself and developing a relationship with yourself to really know who you are and who you are in God and how He made you, how He created you, and what He wants you to be. And that's basically what I'm doing right now. And it's very difficult, but it's a beautiful journey, and I I think that I'm thankful to my cancer because of it. Even if it's going to take my life, even if I'm going to die young, I do feel that getting the cancer was one of the key factors that made me have to change my life. And no matter what, I'm grateful for that, no matter what happens. So that's it for today's video. I know it was a pretty deep topic, and I really hope that you gained some insight out of this. A lot of people don't talk about the emotional side of disease and of cancer in general, so I thought that I wanted to highlight these things, and hopefully that will ignite something inside you to make a change for yourself and to reevaluate your life and the stress factors that could be contributing to your illness. Well, thank you for listening as always. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please do, so that my channel can continue to grow and get this information out there for people who need it. I thank you so much for watching and supporting me as always, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye.